Evan Carter lived with his wife, Rachel, and their two children, 16-year-old Abby and 14-year-old Lucas, in a tranquil suburb of Pennsylvania. Their town was the kind of place where neighbors waved from front porches and kids rode bicycles down tree-lined streets. The Carters' home was a cozy, two-story house with a neatly kept yard and a white picket fence, embodying the American family dream. Inside that house, Evan and Rachel had built a life based on mutual respect, love, and understanding. Or so it seemed. A typical weekday morning in the Carter household was filled with warmth and routine. Sunlight spilled through the kitchen window as Rachel stood at the stove, flipping golden brown pancakes for breakfast. Evan sipped his coffee and read the news on his tablet at the kitchen table, occasionally glancing up to smile at his wife or toss out a lighthearted joke to the kids. Abby scrolled through her phone, trying to cram in last-minute studying for a history quiz, while Lucas hurriedly stuffed his textbooks into his backpack. The smell of fresh coffee and syrup mingled with the sound of gentle morning chatter, painting a picture of domestic bliss. "Did you finish your homework, Luke?" Evan asked, arching an eyebrow at his son. He already knew the answer from the way Lucas avoided eye contact. Lucas let out a guilty groan. "Almost. I just have a couple of math problems left. I promise I'll do them during study hall," he replied as he grabbed a pancake from the platter his mom set down. Rachel turned from the stove with an amused smirk, pushing a stray strand of chestnut-brown hair behind her ear. "Breakfast first, homework second," she lightly scolded. Her tone was gentle, the way it always was when correcting the kids. "And don't forget, you both have choir practice after school, so you'll be home a bit later." Abby rolled her eyes playfully. "We know, Mom," she said between bites of pancake. "We're not little kids anymore." Despite her teenage sass, Abby smiled at her mother, the kind of easy, trusting smile that spoke to how close the family was. Evan chuckled at the exchange. He loved these simple moments the most. Watching Rachel tease Lucas about his messy eating or Abby feign exasperation at her mother's reminders gave him a deep sense of contentment. He reached over and squeezed Rachel's hand affectionately as she finally sat down to join them. "Pancakes are perfect, Rach! You always spoil us," he said sincerely. Rachel's blue eyes sparkled as she squeezed his hand back. "Only the best for my family," she replied. There was genuine love in her voice, a warmth that wrapped around the kitchen as tangibly as the morning sun. Evan felt a swell of pride and happiness. At 42, he considered himself a lucky man. He had a loving wife, 2 great kids, and a peaceful life in a community he cherished. After breakfast, the household bustled with the usual scramble to start the day. Evan grabbed his briefcase from the study. He worked as a project manager for a local manufacturing firm and kissed Rachel on the cheek before heading out to drive the kids to school. Rachel worked part-time as a graphic designer from home, which meant she often took on the morning cleanup while Evan handled the school drop-off. It was a division of labor they'd settled into comfortably over their 18 years of marriage. On the drive, Abby and Lucas sat in the back seat bickering over control of the car radio. Evan just smiled, occasionally glancing at them through the rearview mirror. Abby, with her dark curly hair, a trait she got from him, and Lucas, with the same piercing blue eyes as his mother, were growing up faster than he'd like to admit. He listened as their argument turned into laughter, Lucas making a ridiculous face that had Abby snorting. Moments like that, full of everyday joy, made Evan's heart feel full. "All right, you two, we're here," Evan announced as he pulled up in front of Lincoln High School, the local school both kids attended. It was a squat brick building that had seen better days, but the community was proud of it. He put the car in park and twisted around to face his children. "Remember, I'll pick you up at 5 after choir. Don't make me come looking for you." Abby rolled her eyes again, though her smile lingered. "We won't, Dad." She leaned forward to plant a quick kiss on Evan's cheek, a gesture that warmed him. She was at the age where displays of affection towards parents often waned, but she never hesitated to show love. Lucas gave a salute and a grin as he opened the door. "See ya, Dad. Thanks for the ride." He dashed off before Evan could ruffle his hair. Evan watched them join the throng of students heading into school. Abby was already chatting with her best friend on the sidewalk, and Lucas was bounding up the steps two at a time. Only after they disappeared through the school's double doors did he sigh contentedly and pull away from the curb. As he drove to work, Evan couldn't help but reflect on how peaceful life had been. Sure, there were everyday stresses, projects at work, the kids' occasional squabbles, a leaky faucet that needed fixing, but there were no big troubles on the horizon. He and Rachel rarely fought, and when they did, it was more a disagreement than an argument, resolved quickly with apologies and understanding. They had built a solid foundation of trust over nearly 2 decades, and Evan wore that trust like a badge of honor. In a world where marriages sometimes fell apart, he'd like to think theirs was different, unshakable. That evening, after dinner, the family gathered in the living room for their usual wind-down time. Evan and Rachel curled up on the couch together while the kids sprawled on the rug, a movie playing softly on the TV. Evan felt Rachel rest her head on his shoulder, and he absently kissed her hair. It felt natural, safe, and permanent. In that moment, Evan could not imagine anything ever truly threatening the peace they had built. He had no inkling that beneath the surface of their calm life, a secret was waiting to emerge, one that would shatter the very foundations of the world he thought was so secure. Chapter 2. Unexpected Discovery. It happened on a Saturday afternoon, a few weeks later, when Evan decided to organize the digital photos stored on the family computer. The kids were out with friends, and Rachel was busy in the yard gardening, leaving the house quiet. The shared desktop computer sat in the corner of Evan's study, a repository of years' worth of family memories, vacation snapshots, holiday videos, and everyday moments captured on camera. Evan settled into the desk chair with a contented sigh, ready to tackle the long overdue task of sorting and backing up their photos. As he clicked through folders labeled by years, 2018, 2019, 2020, he found himself smiling at the memories flashing on the screen. Here was a picture of Abby in her Little League uniform, missing her 2 front teeth but grinning proudly. There was Lucas as a toddler, asleep on Evan's chest. Photo after photo affirmed for Evan just how fortunate their family was. He made a mental note to print some of these out for an album, or maybe a digital frame for Rachel as a surprise. In the process of consolidating files, Evan noticed a folder within the 2019 pictures labeled MISC. Curious, he clicked on it. Inside, along with a few stray photos that hadn't been sorted, was a saved email draft. It was an odd place for a text file to be, nestled among images, so it caught his attention. The file name was equally puzzling. letter_to_sarah.eml. Sarah was one of Rachel's closest friends, someone who had moved to another state a few years back. Why would an email to Sarah be saved here, in a folder of photos? Evan hesitated for a moment, not one to snoop by nature. But given the innocuous context, a letter to a friend, he doubted it was anything sensitive. Perhaps it was something Rachel had written and saved, maybe an unsent draft about a minor matter. He double-clicked the file. The document opened, and as Evan began to read, his breath caught in his throat. It was indeed an email, apparently written by Rachel to her friend Sarah, dated 5 years ago. The words on the screen seemed to swim before his eyes as he processed them. "Dear Sarah, I need to tell you something I can't tell anyone else. I feel so guilty and lost. Last week I ran into Eric. You remember my ex-boyfriend Eric from college? It was supposed to be just coffee to catch up, but one thing led to another. I don't know how I let it happen, but I slept with him. It was a short-lived affair, only a couple of weeks of meeting in secret. I've ended it, and I told Eric we can't talk anymore. I love Evan so much, and the kids. If he ever found out, it would destroy him. I am so ashamed, and I hate myself for what I've done. I'm trying to act normal, but every day I wake up terrified that I've ruined my marriage. I don't know how to live with this guilt. I keep telling myself it was a mistake that will never, ever happen again. I'm going to carry this secret to my grave if I can, for the sake of my family. Please, I need someone to talk to. I feel like I can't breathe. I know you'd understand, even if you're disappointed in me. I just needed to tell someone, to confess it to a friendly ear. I can't tell Evan. I'd rather die than hurt him like this. I hope you're doing okay. I miss you. Please write back when you can. I just needed to get this off my chest. Love, Rachel. By the time he finished reading, Evan's hands were trembling on the mouse and keyboard. He stared at the screen, heart thudding in his chest so loudly he could hear the blood rush in his ears. For a moment, everything felt unreal. His vision blurred, and he blinked rapidly, as if the words might change or disappear and prove themselves a horrible misunderstanding. No, no, this can't be, he muttered under his breath. His voice sounded foreign to him, thick with emotion. He read the email again, slower this time, forcing himself to absorb every word. Each sentence was like a dagger. Slept with him, short-lived affair. I love Evan so much. If he ever found out, it would destroy him. A cold wave of nausea rolled over him. Rachel had cheated. His Rachel, who he thought was the very picture of devotion and honesty. 5 years ago, while he was blissfully unaware, thinking their marriage was as solid as bedrock, she had been with another man, her ex-boyfriend of all people. And she hadn't told him. She had lived beside him every day since, holding this secret inside her. Evan pushed back from the desk, suddenly feeling like he couldn't breathe. He stood up, the chair rolling away on its casters. His hands were in his hair, gripping fistfuls as though the pain at his scalp might wake him from this nightmare. But it was no dream. The proof glowed right there on the screen. He paced the small study, mind racing. A flood of questions and emotions crashed into him all at once. Betrayal, anger, hurt, confusion. How? Why? When exactly did this happen? He tried to recall 5 years ago. What was going on in their lives then? Lucas would have been about 9, Abby 11. Was there any sign, any clue at all that he'd missed? He remembered Rachel had taken a short freelance contract around that time that had her out of the house more. She claimed she was meeting clients or working at a cafe for focus. Was that when she was meeting him? Evan racked his brain. Had she seemed distant or anxious back then? He couldn't clearly remember. If there had been subtle cracks, he'd overlooked them, blissfully ignorant. A strangled, bitter laugh escaped him as a thought struck. All those years he was congratulating himself on his happy marriage, on their unshakable trust. Meanwhile, this had been lurking underneath it all. It was as if the foundation of his life had been rotting without him knowing, a cancerous secret growing silently. He felt a tear roll down his cheek and angrily wiped it away. There was anger, yes, a furious anger building inside at Rachel for doing this to them, to him. But there was also an immense sorrow, like something had died. The image of his perfect family life was shattering, piece by piece, right before his eyes. He thought of Abby and Lucas. God, the kids. Did they have any inkling? Probably not. They adored their mother, and nothing seemed amiss. Thank heavens they were out now, not home to see him like this. His first impulse was to march straight into the yard and confront Rachel right that second. He actually took a step toward the door, heart hammering with adrenaline and hurt. Through the window of the study, he could see her outside, kneeling in the flower bed with gardening gloves on, trimming her rose bushes. She looked so peaceful, as if everything were normal. The sight enraged him. How could she appear so calm and normal when she was harboring a secret that was currently tearing him apart? Evan's fists clenched at his sides. A storm of emotions swirled inside him. He wanted to yell, to cry, to demand answers. But a cooler head prevailed for the moment. Barging out in a fury might lead to an explosive confrontation right there in the yard, in view of neighbors or anyone passing by. He didn't want an audience for what was going to be the hardest conversation of his life. He closed the email and quickly copied the file onto a USB flash drive, his movements mechanical and shaky. Part of him still feared this might somehow vanish, and he needed to have proof of what he now knew. After pocketing the drive, he shut down the computer. He took a few deep breaths, trying to steady his racing heart. The adrenaline in his veins made him feel jittery and hot, and he realized he was sweating. Evan walked to the kitchen and splashed cold water on his face at the sink. His reflection in the window above the sink startled him. His brown hair was disheveled from running his hands through it, and his eyes looked wide and wild like a cornered animal's. He forced himself to take slow breaths. He needed to confront Rachel, yes, but he had to do it carefully. This was no small spat or misunderstanding. This was the betrayal of their marriage vows, something that would irreversibly change their family. In that moment, a grim resolve formed inside him. He would get the truth from her, every detail, no more lies. His trust in her had been broken in an instant, but he needed to hear her say it, needed to see her face when she admitted what she had done. Only then could he decide what to do next. Jaw tight and eyes still stinging, Evan dried his face and headed for the back door. His entire world had just tilted off its axis. The peaceful afternoon sunlight seemed almost mocking now. Nothing was as it had seemed just an hour ago. Steeling himself with one last deep breath, Evan pushed open the door and stepped out into the yard, ready to confront the truth. Chapter 3. A difficult conversation. Rachel looked up from her rose bushes as she heard the back door slam. She saw Evan striding across the yard toward her, and something in his gait, urgent, tense, made her straighten up, concern knitting her brow. He rarely looked angry, but now his jaw was set and his face was pale, except for two bright spots of color high on his cheeks. She pulled off her gardening gloves slowly. Evan? Honey, what's the... We need to talk. Now. Evan cut her off, his voice low but firm. There was a tremor in it that he couldn't quite hide. He stood a few feet away from her, fists clenched and trembling at his sides. Rachel had never seen that look in her husband's eyes before, a mixture of hurt and barely controlled anger. Rachel rose to her feet, dusting off her knees. Dirt smudged one of her cheeks. She gave a confused, concerned smile, still clueless about what was coming. Okay, she said cautiously. Is everything all right? You look upset. Evan swallowed, trying to keep his voice from rising in their open yard. Not here. Inside, he managed, turning on his heel and heading back toward the house. Rachel followed, nerves mounting. She pulled off her apron and left it on the patio chair as they went in through the back door. As soon as Rachel closed the door behind them, Evan spun around to face her. They stood in the kitchen, where just that morning everything had been so normal. Now, the air between them felt charged, ready to ignite. Rachel opened her mouth to ask again what was wrong, but the intensity in Evan's eyes stopped her words cold. I know, Evan said, his voice rough. I know what you did, Rachel. He almost spat her name, pain lacing each syllable. He saw her face flicker through emotions, first confusion, then a flash of fear as she realized this wasn't about some minor problem. What are you talking about? She asked in a small voice, instinctively reaching out to touch his arm. Evan jerked away as if burned, and Rachel's eyes widened. Evan couldn't contain it any longer. 5 years ago, he said, the words coming out like venom. Eric, your ex. He saw the color drain from Rachel's face all at once, confirming everything. I found the email you wrote to Sarah, the one where you confessed to sleeping with him. Rachel's hand flew to her mouth. She looked like she might faint. Oh my God, she whispered. Her back bumped against the kitchen counter as she took a step back, as if to steady herself. Her eyes glistened suddenly with tears. Evan, You what? Evan's voice rose, echoing off the kitchen walls. He tried to clamp down on the volume, but the betrayal and hurt were erupting out of him now. You were just going to keep that a secret forever, huh? Pretend it never happened? His vision blurred with angry tears he refused to shed in front of her. All these years, Rachel. I believed in you. I believed in us. And you. He broke off, choking on the words. I'm sorry, she cried, stepping forward. Evan, I'm so sorry. Tears spilled down Rachel's cheeks now, leaving clean tracks through the dirt smudge. It was a mistake, I swear to you. It only happened those few times and I ended it. I never meant to hurt you. But you did hurt me, Evan snapped, voice cracking. You are hurting me. Right now. With this. He paced away from her a few steps, then back, running his hands through his hair. How could you? Our marriage? What about our vows, Rachel? Forsaking all others? Does that ring a bell? His sarcasm was bitter, and Rachel flinched as if slapped. I remember our vows, she sobbed. I never stopped loving you, Evan. Never. This thing with Eric, it wasn't about love. It was a stupid, horrible lapse in judgment. I was weak and I was stupid. Evan fixed her with a glare, his brown eyes usually so warm now fiery. Weak, he echoed. What does that even mean? What? Did I not give you enough attention? Were you bored? He threw up his hands. Help me understand, Rachel. Why would you do this? Rachel's shoulders trembled as she cried. It wasn't like that. You did nothing wrong. I was the one. I don't even have a good reason. I ran into him by chance at that coffee shop downtown. You remember when I took that freelance design gig and would go out to work at the cafe sometimes? Evan gave a curt nod, jaw clenched. One afternoon, Eric walked in. We chatted, caught up on old times. I should have walked away, but I didn't. I agreed to meet him again. I don't know, I was feeling... She wiped her face. Feeling nostalgic, I guess, and flattered. It had been years since college, and a part of me was curious. That curiosity turned into something physical so fast Her voice cracked. I regretted it immediately, but I felt in over my head. It only lasted a couple weeks. The guilt was eating me alive, so I cut it off completely. I told him never to contact me again. She took a tentative step closer, hands clasped together as if in prayer. I didn't tell you because I knew it would destroy us, and it meant nothing to me. Eric meant nothing to me. I was just stupid and selfish. I thought if I kept it secret, I could keep our family safe. I was wrong to hide it. I see that now. But I was so afraid of losing you. Her voice fell to a whisper on the last words. Evan listened, arms crossed tightly as if holding himself together. Each word she said was like rubbing salt in his wound. So you decided unilaterally to protect our marriage by lying to me for years, he said, voice icy. You took away my right to know the truth about my own life, about the person I share a bed with. Did you ever stop to think what keeping the secret did to you? Did you feel even a shred of guilt while smiling at me every day? Rachel winced. Of course I felt guilt. It never went away. Not for one day. I've hated myself for it. I almost told you so many times, but I just couldn't. I didn't want to break your heart or break up our family. The kids were so young then. The kids, Evan repeated with a bitter laugh. You thought about the kids? Did you think about them when you were sneaking around with him? Rachel broke into fresh sobs, and Evan immediately felt a pang of regret at that jab. He loved her, even now, and seeing her in pain caused a reflex of empathy, but he quashed it. He had to stay focused on what she'd done. They never knew anything, Rachel managed between sobs. I never let them sense any. I tried to be a good mom, the whole time, I swear. And I've been faithful to you ever since. I swear on my life, Evan. It was just that one short period 5 years ago. Just that one time, Evan echoed hollowly, shaking his head. Listen to yourself. One time or 100 times, it doesn't matter. You still broke us, Rachel. You broke me. Rachel stepped closer again, desperation in her eyes. Please, Evan. I will do anything to fix this. Anything. I'll go to counseling. I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you. Just don't. Her voice broke. Don't throw away everything we have. The kids need us. Need you. I need you. Evan felt his eyes burn. I didn't throw away anything. You did. He took a shuddering breath, forcing down a swell of emotion. Everything we have? I'm not the one who jeopardized that. You did that when you slept with someone else. They stood facing each other in the kitchen, both breathing hard. Rachel's sobs had quieted to hiccups. Outside, the sun was starting to dip low, the late afternoon light slanting through the window. In another life, this might be the time they'd start preparing dinner together, talking about their day. Now, they were on the brink of ruin. I don't know if I can ever trust you again, Evan said softly, voice raw. That admission hung in the air, more frightening to Rachel than his yelling. How am I supposed to believe anything after this? All these years, you've been lying to me by omission, pretending everything was fine. Do you know how that feels? Rachel wiped her nose with a trembling hand. It feels awful, she whispered. I know because I've lived with what I did every day. I can't defend it. I was wrong and I hurt you. I wish I could take it back, but I can't. All I can say is that I love you truly. And I'm so sorry, Evan. He looked at her, the woman he had loved for so long, now almost unrecognizable to him in this moment. Her face was red and tear-streaked, eyes puffy, and she was trembling. She looked pathetic and heartbroken and terrified. It tugged at his heart, conflicting with the anger and betrayal swirling inside him. He closed his eyes, feeling utterly exhausted, like the fight had drained years from him in a matter of minutes. Just then, the crunch of tires on gravel sounded from the front driveway. The kids were getting dropped off from their outings. Through the kitchen window, Evan saw a neighbor's car that Abby had hitched a ride in. Both he and Rachel froze, eyes darting to the sound. Abby and Lucas would be walking in the door any moment. Rachel panicked. She wiped frantically at her face, trying to compose herself. Evan, she pleaded in a harsh whisper. Please, not in front of the kids. Please. Her eyes begged him as she fought to stifle her sobs. Evan's jaw worked. The last thing he wanted was to drag Abby and Lucas into this right now. They needed to talk to the kids, yes, but not like this. Not with both parents in tears and shouting. Go wash your face, he muttered, voice tight but quiet. Now. Rachel nodded and hurried out of the kitchen toward the downstairs bathroom, just as the front door opened. Evan quickly grabbed a random dish towel and wiped his own face, sucking in deep breaths to steady himself. He heard the familiar voices of his children as they came in. Lucas bragging about some video game high score to Abby. Abby laughing that he'd never beat her record. Abby stepped into the kitchen first, still wearing her jacket and a bright smile from whatever fun she'd been having. Hey, Dad, she began, but immediately her smile faltered as she took in the sight of her father. Evan realized he must not have hid his emotions as well as he thought. Abby's eyes narrowed with concern. Is everything okay? You look upset. Lucas appeared behind her, his grin fading into a similar look of worry. Dad, he echoed. Evan forced a tight smile, trying to keep his voice even. I'm okay, guys. I'm fine. The words felt hollow. How was your day? They exchanged a glance, not entirely convinced, but then Rachel emerged from the hallway, face freshly washed, eyes still a bit red but otherwise composed. Hi, sweethearts, she said, forcing cheerfulness as she went to hug them. Did you have a good time with your friends? Her voice only cracked slightly. Abby hugged her back but looked between her parents suspiciously. Yeah, it was fine. Her teen intuition clearly sensed the tension in the air. Great, Rachel managed. She cleared her throat. Why don't you guys go get cleaned up for dinner? I'll start cooking in a minute. It was a transparent attempt to get them out of the room. Lucas, thankfully, just shrugged and headed upstairs, probably glad to avoid whatever weird parental mood was happening. Abby lingered a second longer, eyes on her father. Dad? Are you sure everything's okay? She asked quietly, concern genuine in her voice. Evan stepped forward and gave her shoulder a squeeze. I'm sure, Abs, he lied softly. Just a rough day at work, that's all. I'll be all right. Abby studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly and headed upstairs after her brother. The moment the kids were out of earshot, the facade fell. Evan turned back to Rachel, who was hovering near the sink. This conversation isn't over, he whispered, anger still evident in his tone but controlled. But it will have to wait. He couldn't do this now, not with the kids just a room away. Rachel nodded, swallowing hard. I understand, she murmured. Evan, I... She looked like she wanted to say more, but didn't have the words. Not now, he said, holding up a hand. He couldn't handle more apologies or pleas at the moment. Without another word, he grabbed his car keys from the hook by the pantry. Rachel's eyes widened in alarm. Where are you going? She asked quietly, voice taut with fear. Out, Evan replied shortly. He needed air. He needed space to think, away from her. I'll be back later. Take care of dinner and the kids. His tone was flat, almost businesslike, betraying none of the storm inside him. Before Rachel could respond, Evan turned and walked out through the front door, closing it behind him with a deliberate calm that belied the chaos he felt. He got into his car and just sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel tight as a tremor passed through him. His home no longer felt like a refuge. He had to get away, if only for a little while. Without a clear destination in mind, he started the engine and drove. Twilight was falling over the neighborhood as he turned corners aimlessly. After a few minutes, he realized where he was heading. His best friend John's house, a few streets over. John had been Evan's closest confidant for years. They coached Little League together and grabbed beers on weekends. If there was anyone he could turn to right now, it was John. Pulling into John's driveway, Evan killed the engine. He sat there, breathing hard, trying to compose himself. But as soon as John opened the front door, having spotted Evan's car lights in the drive, the facade fell. John took one look at his friend's face and ushered him inside without a word. What happened? John asked gently once they were in the privacy of his living room. You look like hell, man. Evan realized he was still shaking. John guided him to sit down on the couch. For a moment, Evan couldn't speak. Saying it aloud would make it real in a way he was still struggling to accept. His throat worked, and then, in a raw, broken whisper, he confessed, Rachel cheated on me. The words tasted bitter and foreign. John's eyes widened in shock. What? Rachel? He clearly had trouble believing it, just as Evan had. Evan nodded, and to his horror, he felt tears well up again. He quickly covered his face with one hand, trying to hold himself together. John squeezed his shoulder. Hey, I'm so sorry. He paused. Do you want to talk about it? He offered quietly. Maybe it was the safety of a friend's presence or just the emotional overload of the day, but Evan found himself pouring everything out. The accidental discovery of the email, the confrontation that followed. John listened without interrupting, his expression oscillating between disbelief and anger on Evan's behalf. When Evan finished recounting the essentials, he slumped back against the couch, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "I don't know what to do," he admitted in a hushed tone. "My mind is telling me one thing. This is unforgivable. But my heart—" He trailed off, conflicted. "My heart is broken, but I still love her. And the kids." John nodded slowly. "Of course you still love her. You don't just turn that off in a day." He ran a hand through his hair, letting out a low whistle. "Man, I had no idea. Rachel always seemed so devoted to you." "Yeah, well." Evan let out a humorless laugh. "So did I." They sat in silence for a minute. Outside, the first stars of evening were appearing, and the living room had grown dim. John finally spoke up, voice steady. "Look, I can't tell you what to do, but whatever you decide, I'm here for you. If you want to try to work it out with her, or if you can't and decide to end it, that's your call. Just know you don't have to decide tonight, okay? And you don't have to go back home until you're ready." He gestured down the hall. "Guest room's yours if you want it." Evan felt a rush of gratitude for his friend. "Thanks, John," he murmured. He realized he truly couldn't face going back home just yet. Sleeping in the same bed that he now knew had been the site of a lie for years was unthinkable right now. "I might take you up on that for tonight," he admitted. John just nodded. "Stay as long as you need. I'll call Mary and let her know we have company," he said, referring to his wife, who was out of town visiting relatives. Evan leaned forward, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. The initial shock was wearing off, leaving a heavy numbness. "I feel like my life just imploded," he said quietly. "I know," John replied softly. "Just take it one step at a time. Did you tell the kids anything?" "No," Evan shook his head vigorously. "And I don't plan to. At least not until I have to." His voice quivered at the thought of Abby and Lucas finding out and having their world shattered too. "I don't want them to know unless there's no choice." He paused. "They don't deserve that pain." "I get it," John said. "Just focus on you tonight. Try to get some rest if you can. We can figure out the rest later." Evan knew sleep would be a long time coming, but he agreed. "Yeah, one step at a time." He managed a faint, grateful smile at his friend, even as tears still glinted in his eyes. Inside, his heart ached with a raw intensity, but at least for this night, he didn't have to face that pain alone. Chapter 4. Decision to Divorce. Evan awoke the next morning on John's guest bed with a heavy heart and a clarity that cut through the emotional haze of the night before. He had barely slept. His mind had churned relentlessly through the dark, replaying every moment of the confrontation with Rachel, every line of that damning email. In the stillness of the early morning, as dawn's gray light filtered through the window, he knew what he had to do. The conclusion had settled like a stone in his chest. The marriage was over. He couldn't envision a future where he would ever trust Rachel again. And without trust, what was a marriage? He thought of the example he needed to set for Abby and Lucas, what it meant to stand by your principles, to not accept betrayal as normal or okay. As much as it tore him up, he believed deep down that ending the marriage was the only path that could possibly lead to any sort of peace for him. John brewed a pot of coffee and offered a silent companionship as Evan readied himself to return home. It was early enough that likely everyone at his house was still asleep. On Sundays, the kids liked to sleep in. Evan preferred it that way. He wanted to talk to Rachel alone, and he didn't want Abby and Lucas to see the state he was in. You sure about this? John asked quietly as he walked Evan to the door, a steaming travel mug of coffee in hand for him. Evan nodded, his face drawn but resolute. I am. His voice was rough from lack of sleep and the weight of what he was about to do. John rested a hand on his shoulder. Call me if you need anything. And remember, you and the kids can stay here if it comes to that any time. Thanks. Evan managed a faint smile of appreciation. For everything. The early Sunday morning streets were quiet as Evan drove the short distance back to his house. His house, soon to be just a house, not a home shared with the woman he loved. His stomach churned at the thought. He wondered if Rachel had slept at all. Did she think he might come back? Surely she knew this conversation was coming. He parked in front of the house and sat for a moment in the car, sipping the coffee John gave him, trying to steady his nerves. The sky was overcast, and the soft light of morning gave the home a subdued, almost somber look. Taking a deep breath, Evan got out and unlocked the front door as quietly as possible. Inside, the house was dim and silent. He glanced up the stairs. No sounds from the kids' rooms. They were likely still asleep. As he set his keys down, he saw Rachel sitting on the living room couch, as if she had been waiting there all night. She was wrapped in a sweater, legs tucked under her, eyes red and swollen from crying, and she looked up at him with a jolt of surprise and hope as he entered. Evan, she breathed, immediately standing. She looked as if she wanted to rush to him, but held herself back, unsure of her welcome. I'm glad you came back. Her voice was hoarse. He shut the door gently behind him, motioning for her to keep her voice down. The kids? He asked quietly. They're still asleep, she confirmed, wiping the crumpled tissue in her hand across her eyes. I was up. I wanted to talk to you before they wake. Evan nodded. His heart pounded as he walked past her into the living room. He noticed she had set a glass of water and some aspirin on the coffee table, likely in anticipation of him coming home with a headache or upset. It was the kind of thoughtful gesture she often did. The kind that now made his chest ache because it reminded him of the wife he thought he knew. He stayed standing, arms folded tightly across his chest, needing that small barrier. Rachel stood a few feet away, wringing her hands. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Evan's jaw worked as he mustered the words for what he needed to say. I thought about it all night, he finally said, keeping his voice low but firm. And I can't do this, Rachel. I can't pretend like everything's all right. It's not. It's never going to be all right after what you did. Each word came out measured, but laden with pain. Rachel's eyes filled anew with tears. I know it's not all right, she said quickly. I know I broke everything, but we can fix it, maybe. Her voice cracked, with time, counseling, something. We love each other. We have a family. Evan raised a hand to stop her, his own eyes moist. I loved the woman I thought you were, he said, a slight tremor in his tone. But that woman wouldn't have slept with someone else and lied to me for years. I don't know how to love the person in front of me now, the one capable of doing that. Rachel clutched her arms around herself as if struck. I'm still me, she whispered. I'm still the woman who's been by your side for 18 years. The mother of your children. I made a terrible mistake. The worst mistake, but that's not all that I am. Please, Evan, she pleaded, voice trembling. Please don't throw us away. His throat tightened. You already threw it away, Rachel. You threw it away when you decided our marriage vows didn't matter. He struggled to keep his voice from rising, glancing toward the stairs to ensure no sign of the kids. I have to live with what you did, and I can't. I won't. Rachel took a few steps forward, desperation evident. Don't say that. We can find a way past this. I know it. We can go to therapy. I'll do whatever it takes. I'll spend every day proving myself to you. Stop, Evan said, more sharply than he intended. He took a breath and continued quietly. Just stop. You made your choices, Rachel. Now I'm making mine. He squared his shoulders, feeling a surge of grim resolve. I'm going to file for divorce. It was the first time he'd said the word out loud to her, divorce, and it hung in the air like a death knell. Rachel gasped softly as if the word itself had physically struck her. She covered her mouth, fresh tears spilling. No. Please, we can't. Don't do this. Think of Abby and Lucas, she whispered urgently. They need their father. They need us together. They will always have a father, Evan interjected, eyes flashing. I'm not abandoning my children, but as for us together. He shook his head, pain twisting in his chest. You ended that us, not me. Rachel was openly weeping now, though struggling to keep herself quiet. I know I did this, but divorcing, Evan, it will break their hearts. It will break mine. Please, can't you at least try to forgive me? I will spend the rest of my life making it up to you. I'll let you rage at me, punish me, anything. Just don't leave. Her words, filled with agony, would have moved him once. And a part of him was moved. This was the woman he'd built a life with, begging him for mercy. But then he thought of that email again, of the image of Rachel in another man's arms, of the 5 years of deceit. His battered heart hardened. I can't live like that, he said, voice stern with finality. Always wondering, never trusting. That would break me more surely than leaving. I won't live a lie just to maintain an image of a happy family for the kids. They'd see right through it anyway. They deserve honesty, and frankly, so do I. Rachel slowly shook her head, tears dripping off her chin. Honesty, she echoed sadly. I know I should have been honest long ago. I was cowardly and selfish. But can't we try to rebuild it? There are people who get past this. I read about it. They do the work and find trust again. Maybe some can, Evan said, his tone softening just a fraction. But I know myself. I know I'll never look at you the same. I'll never sleep next to you without wondering, without picturing. He couldn't finish the sentence, jaw clenching as he fought back the wave of emotion threatening to break him. It would be torture, Rachel, for both of us. You'd be constantly trying to prove something that can't be proven, and I'd be policing a marriage that should be built on trust, not surveillance and suspicion. That's no way to live. Not for you, not for me, and not for the kids either. She covered her face with her hands, shoulders shaking. I did this. I did this. She kept repeating, the guilt and grief coming out in racking sobs. I wish I could take it back. I'd give anything to undo it. Evan felt tears in his own eyes. This was absolutely brutal, seeing her crumble, and knowing he was shattering her hope. But he forced himself to remain steadfast. You can't undo it, he replied, almost gently. What's done is done. We have to face the consequences now. Rachel dropped her hands, looking at him helplessly. How do we even tell the kids? She whispered, voice full of dread. They'll be devastated. Evan closed his eyes for a moment. The thought of Abby and Lucas's faces when they learned their parents were divorcing made his gut twist. I know, he said quietly. It'll be the hardest thing we've ever done, but we'll have to do it when the time is right. And we have to do it together. We'll tell them in a way that makes it clear it's not their fault. She nodded, eyes distant as if already imagining that painful moment. What will we tell them? As the reason? She looked at him with a mix of fear and pleading, perhaps hoping he wouldn't want to tell them the truth of her infidelity. Evan frowned. He hadn't fully thought that far ahead, but he answered, We'll say we just grew apart, or that we have irreconcilable differences. We don't need to give them the ugly details. He had no desire to poison his children's relationship with their mother, if it could be helped. Despite everything, she was a good mother to them. His anger was towards her as a wife, not as a mother. Rachel blinked in surprise at his answer, a flicker of gratitude in her pained expression. She realized he was choosing not to tell the kids about her affair. Thank you, she whispered. For not turning them against me. I'm not doing it for you, Evan said bluntly. I'm doing it for them. They shouldn't have to carry that burden, at least not now. Maybe when they're older. He sighed, rubbing his forehead. I don't know, but let's agree that for now, we keep the reasons vague. We just couldn't work it out. Rachel nodded miserably. They stood in heavy silence, broken only by her occasional sniffle. Evan felt an immense exhaustion settling in. But strangely, alongside the pain, he also felt a sliver of relief that the decision was made and spoken aloud. He was resolute. Despite the anguish of the moment, there was clarity. I'll call a lawyer tomorrow, Evan said quietly, as if saying he'd schedule a mundane appointment. It felt surreal. We can try to do this as amicably as possible, for the kids. Pennsylvania has no-fault divorce. If you cooperate, it can be straightforward. Rachel stared at the floor, tears pattering on the hardwood. The word divorce from his lips had seemingly drained the fight from her. Amicable, she repeated dully. Right. She looked up, eyes filled with despair. If it's what you truly want, I'll cooperate. I don't want to hurt you any more than I already have. Her voice was a ragged whisper. For a second, an impulse to comfort her flashed through him, but he stifled it. That wasn't his role anymore. Instead, he nodded. We need to figure out living arrangements in the meantime, he said, clearing his throat. I can move into the guest room for now. The thought of sleeping in the same bed with her was unbearable. Rachel nodded, fresh tears sliding silently down her cheeks. Okay, she said. She seemed almost numb now, shock settling in. Just then, they heard a creak from the staircase. Both their heads turned to see Abby standing on the steps in her pajamas, looking down at them with a frightened expression. Mom? Dad? Why are you up so early? She asked hesitantly. Is everything all right? Evan exchanged a quick glance with Rachel, and he put on the calmest face he could manage. Hey, sweetie, he said gently. Sorry if we woke you. We were just talking about some adult stuff. His voice, though steady, was weary. Abby slowly came down a few more steps. She must have heard some of their conversation, maybe not the specific words, but enough to sense the emotional weight. Are you guys okay? She asked, eyes flicking to her mother's tear-streaked face. Rachel quickly wiped her cheeks with her sleeve. We're okay, Rachel lied, forcing a weak smile. I was just being a little emotional. You know how I get sometimes? She tried to chuckle, but it sounded hollow. Abby wasn't convinced. Her eyes stayed on her father. She was a perceptive girl. Dad? She pressed quietly. Evan moved to the bottom of the stairs, looking up at his daughter with all the love and reassurance he could muster. It's all right, Abby. Nothing for you to worry about, okay? Your mom and I just had some things to discuss. Why don't you go back to bed for a bit? It's still early. We'll make breakfast soon. She hesitated, clearly sensing the tension, but finally nodded. Okay. Reluctantly, Abby turned and padded back upstairs. Evan waited until he heard her door softly close. He turned back to Rachel. She looked utterly broken, standing in their living room that had seen so many happy memories, now the backdrop to this tragedy. We'll get through telling them when the time comes, he said, more kindly than before. It'll be hell, but we'll do it. Rachel managed to nod. I know you probably hate me now, she said, voice trembling. But I want you to know I understand why you're doing this. It's my fault. All of it. Evan was silent for a long moment. He didn't trust himself to answer directly. Did he hate her? In that moment, he certainly hated what she had done, and part of him was furious and deeply wounded. But hate her? The word felt too simple for the tangle of feelings he had. There was anger, betrayal, sorrow, and yes, remnants of love too, all knotted together. I'm too hurt to sort out how I feel about you right now, he admitted quietly. I just know I can't be your husband anymore. Saying it out loud felt like driving a nail into the coffin of their marriage. We'll figure out the details, but the decision is made. Rachel covered her mouth to stifle a sob, nodding. Evan turned away, blinking back tears of his own as he headed upstairs, passing by the closed doors of his children, heartsick at the thought that soon those doors would be part of two separate households. But he told himself it was the right thing to do, the only thing he could do to reclaim his dignity and sense of self-worth. His marriage was over. Now, for the sake of himself and his kids, he had to end it properly. Chapter 5. Handling the Divorce. In the weeks that followed, Evan and Rachel moved through the steps of ending their marriage with a determined calm. True to their word, they aimed to keep things as civil and fair as possible, especially for Abby and Lucas's sake. It was not easy. The emotional wound was still raw for both of them, but they set aside their pain during the necessary discussions about the future. Evan contacted a divorce attorney on Monday, who helped him file a divorce complaint under Pennsylvania's no-fault provisions, citing an irretrievable breakdown of the marriage. Rachel, as promised, did not contest it. She met with her own lawyer briefly to be informed of her rights, but she too wanted the process to be smooth and quick. Within a couple of weeks, both had signed affidavits consenting to the divorce. Then came the mandatory 90-day waiting period required by state law for a mutual consent divorce. Those 3 months were some of the most emotionally challenging of their lives, yet practically, they used the time to sort out the details of separation. They chose not to immediately inform Abby and Lucas about the divorce filing. Instead, Evan and Rachel took time to carefully plan how they would break the news and what their co-parenting arrangement would look like, so they could present a clear plan to the children when the time came. During those early weeks, an uneasy normalcy settled in the house. Evan moved into the guest room, and he and Rachel maintained a polite, if painfully distant, cordiality around the kids. It was as if they were co-workers managing a project, carefully coordinating schedules, household chores, and childcare, while avoiding any personal conversation beyond the necessary. There were moments Abby and Lucas eyed their parents with concern. No more casual touches or warm laughter between mom and dad. But Evan and Rachel deflected the questions with half-truths about stress at work or not feeling well. Many late nights after the kids were asleep, Evan and Rachel sat down at the dining table to discuss the terms of their separation. They divided assets with minimal argument. The family home was the biggest consideration. Ultimately, they agreed Rachel would keep living in the house with the children during her custody periods, at least until the kids were out of high school, to give them stability. They decided not to sell it immediately. Evan didn't want Abby and Lucas to lose their home on top of everything. In exchange, he would retain a larger share of their savings and retirement accounts to balance things fairly. Material things like furniture, the second car, and other possessions were split without much fight. Neither had the heart for squabbling. If one started to get emotional over an item, like the photo albums or some piece of furniture tied to a memory, they'd simply pause and decide to come back to it later. But in the end, almost everything was sorted equitably, with both of them bending here and there to reach a fair outcome. They were most careful when it came to discussing their children. Both agreed the kids should have as much time with each parent as possible. Equal joint physical custody were the legal words, but for Evan and Rachel, it meant Abby and Lucas would still get two loving parents deeply involved in their lives. They outlined a schedule. The children would alternate weeks between staying with Rachel and staying with Evan, switching every Sunday. Their schools and community activities would remain unchanged. Evan found an apartment only 10 minutes away, in the same school district, making transitions easier. They agreed to share holidays by alternating major ones each year, and to attend important events, like school plays or graduations, together if possible, putting the kids first. Whatever differences we have, Evan had said quietly during one planning session, we have to be a team for them. Rachel had nodded fervently, determined to uphold her role as their mother, even if she had failed as a wife. One evening, about a month after the initial confrontation, Evan and Rachel knew it was time to talk to the children. The tension in the house was palpable, and it wasn't fair to keep Abby and Lucas in the dark any longer. They chose a Friday night, so the kids would have the weekend to begin processing the news. Evan remembered how his hands shook that evening as the four of them gathered in the living room, the same room where laughter and warmth once flowed so freely. Evan and Rachel sat on the couch together, albeit with a noticeable space between them. Abby and Lucas sat across from their parents, looking nervous. They sensed something big was coming. Rachel took a shaky breath and began gently. Your dad and I have something we need to talk to you about. Her voice quivered, despite her attempt to sound steady. Abby immediately tensed, her eyes flicking from her mother to her father. Lucas frowned in worry. What is it? Lucas asked, sounding small. Evan cleared his throat. His heart felt like it might pound out of his chest. We want you both to know first of all that we love you. So much, he said, making sure to look each of his children in the eye. What we're going to tell you isn't your fault in any way, and we are both here for you, always. He faltered, the introduction tangling in his mouth. Rachel reached for his hand on reflex, and though it caused him a pang, he let her hold it for this moment as a sign of unity for the kids. Your dad and I, she continued for him, we have decided to separate and divorce. Her voice cracked on the last word. Abby sucked in a breath as if punched, her face contorting in shock and pain. What? She whispered. No. You're joking, right? But she could tell from their expressions that it was no joke. Lucas looked back and forth between his parents, confusion and panic rising in his eyes. Divorce? But why? You don't even fight, he exclaimed, voice breaking. At 14, he was old enough to understand what divorce meant, but not why this was happening to his family. Evan squeezed Rachel's hand unconsciously as he spoke up. Sometimes, even when two people care about each other, they can't stay married, he said softly. We've been having problems, and we've tried to work on them, but we can't fix them. He hated speaking in such generalities, but the truth was far too complicated and harmful to expose. This decision was very hard for us, and we waited to tell you until we were sure. I don't understand, Abby cried, tears spilling. You guys love each other. Or at least, I thought you did. She looked at them, desperate for an explanation that made sense. What changed? She pleaded. Rachel wiped her own tears and tried to steady her voice for the kids. What your dad said is true. We do care about each other, but we've hurt each other in ways that can't be undone. Her voice wavered. She carefully avoided specifics. Sometimes adults drift apart. She winced internally at her own words, feeling their inadequacy. But one thing will never change. We both love you with all our hearts. That will always be the most important thing. Lucas had begun to cry silently, shoulders shaking as he stared at the floor. Are we going to have to move? Who will we live with? He managed between sniffles. Evan quickly shook his head. You're not moving far, buddy. Your mom and I have figured out a plan. You'll live with each of us part of the time. A week here, a week at my new apartment. It's not far, still close to school. He tried to inject a reassuring tone. You'll have a room at Mom's house and a room at Dad's place. We'll try to keep everything else as normal as possible. Same schools, same activities. We'll both be there for all the important stuff. We will always be your parents, Rachel added, voice thick. That won't ever change. We're going to work together to take care of you, even though we won't be married anymore. Abby was openly sobbing now. I don't want two houses, she choked out. I want one house with both of you in it. It broke Evan's heart. There was no answer to give that could make that okay. He moved to sit on the coffee table in front of Abby and gently took her hands. She looked so much younger in that moment, eyes puffy and pleading like a little girl. I know, sweetheart, Evan said softly, tears in his own eyes. I know this is so hard. If we could find another way, we would. But I promise you, we will do everything to make sure you and your brother still feel loved and secure. You can still see us both all the time. It's just... We won't all be under one roof. Abby pulled her hands away and stood up abruptly, anger flashing through her anguish. This is just wrong, she shouted in a hushed voice, mindful even in her distress not to wake the neighbors. Fix it! Why can't you just fix whatever's wrong? She looked between them, then directly at her mother, a sudden suspicion in her eyes, as if connecting dots from the last month of tension. Did something happen? Did someone do something? Her voice had a sharp edge. Rachel's face drained of color. Abby, honey, this isn't because of you or anything you did, she deflected. I didn't ask if it was because of me, Abby retorted. I asked if someone did something. Because you guys were fine, and then you weren't. She looked at Evan, her gaze probing. Dad? She asked, hoping he might reveal a reason. Evan felt a stab of alarm. Abby was perceptive indeed. But he held to the plan. He gently stood and put a hand on Abby's shoulder, but she shrugged it off. What happened is between Mom and me, he said carefully. What you need to know is that we both love you and your brother, and that will never stop. The reasons are complicated, and it's not important for you to carry that burden. Abby's face contorted, torn between wanting answers and not knowing how to ask. Finally, with a wounded cry, she turned and ran upstairs. A second later, her bedroom door slammed. Lucas, who had remained on the couch quietly sobbing, now cried harder at his sister's departure. I don't want you to divorce, he moaned softly. Rachel sat beside him and wrapped her arms around his shoulders. I know, baby, she whispered, her tears falling into his sandy hair. I know. I'm so sorry. Evan sat on Lucas's other side and rubbed his back, his throat too tight to speak for a moment. They stayed like that for a while, comforting Lucas and letting him vent his hurt and confusion as best he could. After some time, Abby's door creaked open and she returned, eyes red but anger seemingly spent, replaced with desolation. She silently crawled into her father's lap as she had not done since she was a little girl, and cried into his chest. Evan held her close, kissing the top of her head, murmuring apologies and words of comfort that felt utterly insufficient. Rachel held Lucas's hand, tears quietly streaming as she apologized over and over to the kids. That night was the hardest of all. But in its own way, it was a turning point. The secret was out in the open for the family, and they could begin to heal from it. In the days that followed, the initial shock gave way to a fragile, new routine. Evan moved out into a modest two-bedroom apartment nearby, making sure the kids saw it and helped decorate their own bedrooms there, so it felt like a second home rather than a strange place. Rachel remained in the house, which became a familiar anchor for the children each time they switched homes. Though the circumstances were painful, Evan and Rachel maintained a united front in co-parenting. They coordinated schedules via text and cordial phone calls, exchanged the children without drama, and even managed a weekly family dinner altogether for the first month, to reassure Abby and Lucas that, despite everything, they were still a family, in a different form. When the 90-day waiting period elapsed, their divorce paperwork was ready to be finalized. On a crisp autumn morning, Evan and Rachel found themselves together in a hushed courtroom downtown, appearing before a judge to finalize the dissolution of their marriage. It was a brief, procedural hearing, since everything had been agreed upon. Both of them answered the judge's questions politely. Yes, the marriage was irretrievably broken. Yes, they had agreed to the terms of the settlement. Within minutes, the judge signed the decree. Just like that, 18 years of marriage officially ended with the stroke of a pen. Walking out of the courthouse as ex-spouses, Evan and Rachel shared a moment of awkward stillness on the front steps. Rachel fiddled with the divorce papers in her hands. "Thank you," she said softly, not quite meeting Evan's eyes. Evan glanced at her, surprised. "For what?" His voice was gentle. The anger between them had cooled in these past months, replaced by a somber cordiality. "For keeping it civil, for thinking of the kids, for not punishing me more than—" Her voice wavered and she didn't finish the sentence. Evan looked away to the skyline of the city. This was not how he ever imagined his life would turn out. But here they were. "I didn't want to punish anyone," he said quietly. "I just want what's best for Abby and Lucas, and to be able to move on." He swallowed hard, then added, "I hope you find some peace too, Rachel." She wiped a tear and finally met his eyes. "You deserve peace and happiness, Evan. I'm sorry I—" She stopped herself. They'd been over it enough. "I'm sorry," she finished simply. He gave a small nod, acknowledging her apology, though he didn't repeat an acceptance nor dismiss it. Instead, he extended his hand somewhat formally. She hesitated a split second, then shook it. It was a gesture of closure, two people acknowledging the end of one chapter and the uncertain start of another. "Take care of yourself," he said, as they released hands. "You too," she whispered. They parted with a sad, understanding smile. Rachel walked down the courthouse steps and toward her car, alone. Evan watched her go for a moment, then turned and walked in the opposite direction toward his own car. The sky above was clear, and the day was bright, belying the heaviness in his heart. Yet, as he drove away, he felt a strange sense of relief mingling with the sadness. The worst was behind them now. The secrets, the confrontation, the legalities, and ahead lay the task of rebuilding his life from the wreckage. Chapter 6. Adapting to a new life. Autumn turned to winter, winter to spring. With the divorce finalized and the dust slowly settling, Evan gradually adjusted to the new contours of his life. He poured his energy into his children and his work, finding in them a sense of purpose that helped fill the void. Each day was a lesson in moving forward. Some days were easier than others. In the early months after the separation, Evan often woke up in his apartment disoriented, reaching across the bed for someone who wasn't there. Loneliness hit hardest in those quiet moments. But he pushed through, establishing routines to keep himself grounded. He started going to the gym in the mornings, finding that physical exercise burned off some of the anxiety and sadness that lingered. At work, he took on a couple of new projects, immersing himself during the hours the kids weren't with him. True to their agreement, the co-parenting arrangement settled into a steady rhythm. One week, the apartment would echo with the sounds of Abby singing along to music in her room and Lucas playing video games in the living area. Evan would cook dinner for three, often something simple like spaghetti or tacos, and they'd eat around his small kitchen table, the conversation gradually returning to normal family chatter about school and friends. The next week, the apartment would fall silent as the kids stayed with Rachel in the house, and Evan would count the days until they bounced through his door again. It wasn't just the kids adapting. Evan had to adapt to seeing them only half the time. He cherished their time with him even more. He took up new little traditions: Friday movie nights with pizza when the kids were at his place, Saturday morning pancakes. He had become quite good at replicating Rachel's recipe. He helped Abby practice for her driving test in the empty mall parking lot, and he coached Lucas's little league team in the spring, as he had for years. Only now, he did it as a single dad, with John still assistant coaching by his side for support. One sunny Saturday at the baseball field, Evan stood at the dugout fence, cheering as Lucas hit a solid double. "Great swing!" he shouted, pride warming him. It was moments like this, normal, joyful moments, when he realized that life was finding a new equilibrium. In the bleachers, he spotted Rachel sitting with Abby, both of them clapping for Lucas. A year ago, seeing her might have brought a surge of anger or pain. Now, though a faint ache still existed, Evan could manage a polite wave. Rachel waved back with a tentative smile. They had found a cordial coexistence. At school events and games, they would make small talk about the kids, share updates, even sit together sometimes so the children felt their parents supporting them in unison. After the game, Lucas ran up, breathless and beaming, holding the game ball he'd earned. "Did you see that hit, Dad?" he asked eagerly. "I did." Evan grinned, ruffling his son's hair. "That was awesome. I'm proud of you." Abby joined them, and Evan put an arm around her shoulders, pulling her into a side hug. She had been quieter since the divorce, more introspective, but over the months she had slowly warmed back up, smiling and joking more like her old self. She leaned into her dad now, a small but important sign of trust that he treasured. Rachel approached the family huddle, offering congratulations to Lucas. The four of them stood together, an awkward circle at first, but then Abby started teasing Lucas about nearly tripping at second base, and he protested while laughing. For a moment, they almost felt like the old times, just a family celebrating a Saturday win. Evan shared a glance with Rachel. There was sadness in that glance, but also a mutual understanding. They would always be tied together through their children, and in that sense, they were still family, albeit in a redefined way. As the afternoon sun cast golden rays over the field, Evan realized something had shifted within him. The anguish and betrayal that once consumed his every waking moment had gradually been giving way to a cautious optimism. He had survived the worst days, and so had his kids. There were still challenges. Moments when Abby would get upset and demand answers they gently wouldn't give, or nights Lucas felt anxious and needed extra reassurance. But those moments were becoming less frequent. With time, the children were healing, especially seeing that mom and dad could still be civil and even kind to each other. Evan, too, was healing. He no longer went to sleep consumed by thoughts of the affair. He had even started seeing a therapist a few months after the divorce was final, just to talk things through and make sense of his new identity as a divorced man. It helped more than he expected, giving him tools to manage the flashes of anger or loneliness and to focus on the future rather than the past. He learned to forgive himself for not noticing the signs of betrayal, his therapist gently reminding him that the deceit had been deliberate and not his fault. And while he wasn't sure if he'd ever fully forgive Rachel, he at least let go of the constant resentment. Holding on to that anger only prolonged his pain, a truth he came to accept in therapy. One evening, after dropping the kids off at their mom's, Evan stopped by a local park on his way home. It was a warm spring twilight, the sky painted with streaks of pink and orange. He sat on a bench and watched a group of ducks glide across the pond. The simple tranquility of the scene made him smile faintly. He realized that for the first time in a long time he felt okay. Not fantastic, not awful, just okay. and that was progress. He reflected on the journey of the past year. It had been, without question, the hardest period of his life. He had lost a partner, the woman he once imagined growing old with. But he had regained something too: his self-respect. When faced with a betrayal that violated his core values, he stood up for himself and what he believed he deserved in a marriage. That thought gave him a sense of hard-won pride. He hadn't allowed the betrayal to define the rest of his life. Instead, he had made the choice to demand better, for himself and indirectly for his children, who would one day grow up and face their own relationships. By ending the marriage, he had indeed preserved his dignity and found a measure of inner peace. The nights of crying or raging into the void were over. In their place was a quiet resolve and a focus on what mattered now: being the best father he could be, and eventually, when he was truly ready, perhaps opening his heart again to someone new. He wasn't in a rush for that. For now, it was enough to rebuild his life on his own terms, one day at a time. As the last light of the sun dipped below the horizon, Evan left the park and headed home to his apartment, a place that, bit by bit, was starting to feel like home. He knew there would still be tough days ahead. The aftermath of such a betrayal doesn't vanish entirely. But he also knew he had the strength to handle whatever came next. He had his children, who loved him unconditionally, a supportive friend in John, and the unshakable knowledge that he had stayed true to himself through it all. That night, Evan cooked himself a simple dinner and sat down at the table. The apartment was quiet, but he didn't feel lonely at that moment. He felt at peace. Before eating, he bowed his head for a brief moment of gratitude for his children's well-being, for the support around him, and for the strength he found within to start anew. In that peaceful silence, Evan knew he had done the right thing. The past was behind him. Ahead was a future he would greet on his own terms, with hope and integrity. And that knowledge finally made him feel truly free. Pennsylvania's mutual consent no-fault divorce requires a 90-day waiting period after filing, which Evan and Rachel complied with, using that time to negotiate terms without acrimony. Despite the infidelity, both parents remained committed to their children's well-being. Pennsylvania law prioritizes the best interests of the child in custody arrangements, and Evan and Rachel mirrored that principle by agreeing to a shared custody schedule that kept the kids' lives as stable as possible.